In the perfectly manicured world of Pleasant Acres lived Karen, the self-appointed guardian of order. As president of the Homeowners Association, or HOA, Karen ruled with an iron fist, her primary mission to maintain the aesthetic harmony which, in her opinion, meant a complete absence of anything resembling nature. Every blade of grass had to be precisely 3 inches tall, every flower bed meticulously weeded, and any deviation from the prescribed color palette was met with swift and decisive action. She took her job very seriously, some might say a little too seriously. Her days were filled with patrolling the neighborhood, clipboard in hand, ready to issue violation notices for the slightest infraction. The residents of Pleasant Acres often joked that Karen could spot a dandelion from a mile away, but beneath the surface of the forced conformity, a quiet rebellion was brewing. People whispered about Karen's overzealousness, longing for a touch of the wild, a splash of color, something, anything to break the monotony. Little did Karen know a catalyst for change was about to arrive in the form of a newcomer named David, a man who believed that beauty wasn't found in perfect symmetry, but in the vibrant chaos of nature. Just beyond the perfectly aligned fences and meticulously trimmed hedges of Pleasant Acres lay a secret world, an expansive forest teeming with life. This wasn't some carefully curated park. It was a wild, untamed expanse of towering trees, winding paths, and the constant chorus of birdsong. Sunlight dappled through the leaves, illuminating hidden glades where wildflowers bloomed in riotous colors, squirrels darted up tree trunks, and butterflies danced among the blossoms. This forest was everything Pleasant Acres wasn't. It was a place of freedom, of natural beauty, a stark contrast to the rigid order Karen so fiercely maintained. The residents of Pleasant Acres, while outwardly compliant, often found themselves drawn to the edge of the forest, their eyes lingering on the vibrant scene just beyond their carefully controlled lawns. They yearned for a connection to something real, something alive, something that Karen's rules seemed determined to suppress. The forest served as a constant reminder of what they were missing, a symbol of the natural world Karen tried so hard to keep at bay. It was a constant, gentle challenge to her authority. David arrived in Pleasant Acres with a truck full of potted plants, a mischievous glint in his eye, and a profound love for all things wild. He wasn't oblivious to the HOA rules. He'd read them, scoffed at them, and then filed them away with a plan to subtly but surely challenge every single one. Unlike his neighbors, David didn't see the forest as a threat to their pristine lawns. He saw it as an extension of his own backyard, a source of inspiration and a place of solace. He quickly became known for his unconventional gardening. Instead of perfectly symmetrical rose bushes, David cultivated sprawling wildflower gardens, attracting bees, butterflies, and, much to Karen's dismay, birds. He hung bird feeders, built birdhouses, and even let his grass grow a little longer than the prescribed 3 inches. David wasn't trying to be deliberately rebellious, but he simply couldn't understand the desire to control nature so completely. He believed that beauty lay in the wild, untamed spirit of the natural world, a spirit he was determined to bring to Pleasant Acres, one wildflower and one chirping bird at a time. But David's love for birds went beyond feeders and birdhouses. He discovered a network of people who rescued birds from neglectful situations, pet shops that couldn't care for them, homes where they were mistreated, or even birds injured in the wild. He transformed his garage into a makeshift bird sanctuary, complete with spacious cages, specialized diets, and plenty of tender, loving care. He spent hours tending to his feathered friends, nursing them back to health, teaching them to fly again, and preparing them for a life in the wild. Each bird had its own unique story, and David listened patiently, offering comfort and support. He knew that his actions were technically against HOA regulations. Keeping wild animals was strictly prohibited, but he justified it to himself as a moral imperative. He couldn't stand the thought of these beautiful creatures suffering in captivity when they deserved to soar freely through the skies. The forest bordering Pleasant Acres beckoned, promising a life of freedom and natural wonder. He knew he had to help them get there. Karen, ever vigilant, noticed the increased avian activity around David's property. At first, it was just a subtle increase in chirping, a few more birds flitting among the wildflowers. But soon, it became a full-blown avian spectacle. Flocks of birds gathered in his trees, their songs filling the air with a joyous melody that contrasted sharply with the sterile silence Karen preferred. She watched from behind her perfectly symmetrical rose bushes, her eyes narrowed with suspicion. She saw David carrying bags of bird seed, tending to his feeders, and spending an inordinate amount of time in his garage, the door always carefully closed. Something was definitely amiss. Driven by a mixture of suspicion and righteous indignation, Karen decided to investigate. She couldn't quite put her finger on it, but she knew that David was up to something that violated at least 3, possibly 4 sections of the HOA rulebook. And Karen wouldn't rest until she uncovered the truth and put a stop to his flagrant disregard for the rules of Pleasant Acres. The birds, she decided, were just the beginning. The following morning, clipboard in hand, Karen marched purposefully towards David's property. She rang the doorbell with a firm, authoritative push, her expression a mask of disapproval. When David opened the door, Karen launched into her prepared speech, barely giving him a chance to respond. "Mr. David," she began, her voice laced with thinly veiled disdain, "it has come to the attention of the HOA that you are attracting an excessive amount of wildlife to your property. Section 4, paragraph 12. Subsection B clearly states that residents are prohibited from creating conditions that may attract or harbor wild animals, including, but not limited to, birds, squirrels, rodents, and insects." She paused for breath, her eyes scanning David's wildflower garden with undisguised disapproval. "These birds are not only a nuisance, but they also pose a potential health hazard. Furthermore," she continued, brandishing her clipboard, "your grass exceeds the permissible height, and your flower beds are, well, let's just say they are not in compliance with the approved landscaping guidelines." She issued a formal warning, threatening fines if the situation wasn't rectified immediately. David listened patiently, a faint smile playing on his lips. He knew this was coming. David, unfazed by Karen's threats, simply smiled and nodded. He listened politely, but his mind was already racing with plans for the upcoming bird release. He knew Karen wouldn't understand his motives, his deep connection to the natural world, or his desire to help these creatures reclaim their freedom. He wasn't deliberately trying to be difficult, but he couldn't compromise his values. He continued his bird rescue efforts, working tirelessly to prepare his feathered friends for their new lives. He reinforced the cages, stocked up on birdseed, and meticulously planned the release location, choosing a spot near the edge of the forest where the birds would have easy access to food, shelter, and the company of their wild brethren. He knew that Karen was watching him, her eyes like hawks, ready to pounce on any infraction. But he was determined to proceed with his plan, regardless of the consequences. He believed that the joy and freedom these birds would experience were worth any fine or reprimand Karen could throw his way. The grand bird release was imminent. The day arrived crisp and clear, the perfect weather for a bird's first flight to freedom. Under the cover of early morning, before most of Pleasant Acres had even stirred, David carefully loaded the cages into his truck. His heart pounded with anticipation and a touch of nervousness. He knew this was a risky move, but he couldn't shake the feeling that it was the right thing to do. He drove to the edge of the forest, to the spot he had carefully selected. The air was alive with the sounds of nature, the rustling of leaves, the chirping of crickets, and the distant calls of wild birds. He parked the truck, took a deep breath, and began unloading the cages. Inside, the birds chirped excitedly, sensing the nearness of their long-awaited liberation. Their eyes gleamed with anticipation, their feathers ruffled with nervous energy. David smiled at them reassuringly. "Almost there," he whispered. "Almost home." He was ready to unleash a flurry of feathers and freedom upon Pleasant Acres, whether Karen liked it or not. With a deep breath and a final glance at the cages, David began to open the doors. One by one, he unlatched the gates, stepping back to allow the birds to emerge at their own pace. The first bird, a vibrant bluebird, hesitated for a moment, its head cocked to one side, taking in the sight of the vast forest before it. Then, with a burst of energy, it leaped from the cage, its wings catching the morning sun. It soared upward, circling once before diving into the trees, its joyful song echoing through the air. Soon, the other birds followed suit. Cardinals, finches, sparrows, and even a rescued parrot with brilliantly colored plumage all emerged from their cages, eager to explore their newfound freedom. The air filled with a kaleidoscope of colors and a symphony of chirps and tweets as the birds took to the skies, disappearing into the welcoming embrace of the forest. It was a beautiful, chaotic scene, a testament to the power of nature and the unwavering spirit of freedom. The spectacle, however beautiful, didn't go unnoticed. The flurry of wings and the chorus of birdsong carried through the quiet morning air, reaching the ears of none other than Karen, who was just embarking on her daily patrol of Pleasant Acres. At first, she dismissed it as just the usual morning birdsong from the forest, but then she noticed a flash of blue, followed by a streak of red, and then a parrot, flying towards the trees. Her eyes widened in disbelief. Something was definitely amiss. Driven by a potent mix of curiosity and outrage, Karen followed the sound of the birdsong, her perfectly polished shoes crunching on the gravel path. As she rounded a bend in the road, she saw it. David, standing near the edge of the forest, surrounded by empty cages, a smug look on his face as dozens of birds soared into the trees. The sight sent a jolt of fury through her. This was a blatant violation of everything she stood for, a direct challenge to her authority, and she would not stand for it. The war between order and nature had officially begun. "David," Karen shrieked, her voice piercing the morning air like a siren, "what do you think you're doing? This is a blatant violation of HOA regulations. You can't just release wild animals into our community." Her face was turning a shade of red that rivaled the cardinals now flitting through the trees. David, unfazed by her outburst, simply shrugged. "They're not wild animals, Karen," he said calmly. "They're rescued birds. They deserve to be free." "Free?" Karen sputtered. "Free to wreak havoc on our meticulously maintained lawns? Free to spread disease and create a nuisance? This is unacceptable. I'm issuing you a citation right now." "You'll be hearing from the HOA." She fumbled in her purse for her violation book, her hands shaking with fury. But as she stood there, ranting and raving about HOA regulations, something unexpected happened. The birds, sensing her agitation, began to swarm around her. It was as if they were drawn to her anger, curious about the source of her negativity. A small finch landed delicately on Karen's perfectly coiffed hair, followed by a bolder sparrow that perched on her shoulder. Soon, more birds joined the party. A cardinal nestled comfortably on her head, while a mischievous parrot nipped playfully at her ear. Karen, initially oblivious, continued to rant, her voice growing louder and more shrill. "This is outrageous," she screeched, shaking her fist in the air. "I will not tolerate this blatant disregard for the rules." It was only when she felt a tickling sensation on her nose that she finally realized what was happening. She stopped mid-sentence, her eyes widening in disbelief as she saw a blur of feathers surrounding her. A small bluebird was perched precariously on her nose, its tiny claws tickling her skin. "Get off me!" she screamed, swatting wildly at the birds, but her efforts were futile. The birds, emboldened by her reaction, only swarmed her more intensely, their chirps and tweets filling the air with a chaotic symphony. Karen, the self-proclaimed guardian of order, was now completely surrounded by the very creatures she sought to control. The scene descended into pure chaos. Karen flailed her arms wildly, swatting at the birds with her violation book, sending feathers flying in every direction. Her perfectly coiffed hair was now a tangled mess, adorned with stray feathers and the occasional bird dropping. Her pristine white blouse was covered in birdseed and tiny bird footprints. She shrieked and screamed, but her cries were drowned out by the cacophony of birdsong and the rustling of feathers. It was a scene straight out of a cartoon, a whirlwind of feathers, flapping wings, and a furious Karen, completely overwhelmed by the very nature she sought to control. David, watching from a safe distance, couldn't help but chuckle. He felt a twinge of sympathy for Karen, but he also couldn't deny the satisfaction of seeing her so thoroughly discombobulated. It was as if the birds were staging a protest, a feathered rebellion against her rigid rules and her disdain for the natural world. The scene was both absurd and strangely beautiful, a perfect illustration of the power of nature to disrupt even the most carefully constructed order. The irony wasn't lost on anyone when, a few days later, Karen received a certified letter from the HOA. It wasn't a thank you note for her tireless service or a commendation for her unwavering dedication to the rules. Instead, It was a notice of violation, accompanied by a hefty fine of $1,000. The reason? Disturbing the peace and attracting wildlife. Apparently, several residents had complained about the commotion caused by Karen's screaming and flailing, as well as the sudden increase in bird activity in the neighborhood. The HOA, after reviewing the evidence, which included several cell phone videos of the incident, determined that Karen was, in fact, responsible for attracting the birds and disrupting the tranquility of Pleasant Acres. The fine was a bitter pill to swallow. Karen, the enforcer of the rules, was now a violator herself. The image of her, covered in feathers, holding the fine notice, her face a mask of disbelief and fury, quickly spread throughout the neighborhood, becoming a symbol of the HOA's overreach and the absurdity of its regulations. The tables had turned, and Karen was now the laughingstock of Pleasant Acres. The image of Karen, covered in feathers, clutching the giant fine notice with a bold red 1,000 fine stamp emblazoned across it, became legendary in Pleasant Acres. It was shared on social media, printed on t-shirts, and even turned into a meme. It perfectly captured the absurdity of the situation, the triumph of nature over order, and the comeuppance of a self-righteous HOA president. But beyond the humor, the image also sparked a deeper conversation within the community. People began to question the HOA's rules, wondering if they were too restrictive, too focused on aesthetics, and not enough on the well-being of the residents and the environment. David, emboldened by the outpouring of support, decided to challenge the fine and advocate for a more nature-friendly approach to neighborhood living. He organized a community meeting, inviting residents to share their thoughts and ideas. He presented a proposal for revising the HOA rules, suggesting ways to incorporate more green spaces, encourage native plants, and protect local wildlife. The meeting was a resounding success, with many residents expressing their support for David's vision. It seemed that Karen's feathered fiasco had inadvertently sparked a revolution in Pleasant Acres. The challenge to Karen's fine became a rallying cry for the community. David, along with a growing coalition of like-minded residents, presented a compelling case to the HOA board, arguing that the fine was not only unjust, but also counterproductive. They emphasized the importance of biodiversity, the benefits of green spaces, and the need to create a more welcoming environment for wildlife. They argued that attracting birds wasn't a nuisance, but an asset, bringing beauty, song, and natural pest control to the neighborhood. They pointed out the economic benefits of reduced lawn maintenance and water consumption associated with native plants and wildflowers. Even some of the more conservative members of the HOA board began to waver, swayed by the passionate arguments and the overwhelming support from the community. They realized that the old rules were outdated and out of touch with the changing values of Pleasant Acres. The feathered fiasco had forced them to reevaluate their priorities and consider a new vision for the future of the neighborhood. The winds of change were blowing through Pleasant Acres, carrying with them the promise of a more harmonious relationship between humans and nature. In the end, a compromise was reached. Karen's fine was rescinded, and the HOA agreed to revise its rules to allow for more natural landscaping, bird feeders, and even designated wildlife habitats. There were still some restrictions, of course. No excessive birdseed, no unkempt lawns, and no dangerous animals allowed, but the overall atmosphere of Pleasant Acres had shifted. Slowly but surely, the neighborhood began to embrace a more balanced approach, finding a way to integrate nature into their carefully curated community. Wildflowers bloomed alongside manicured lawns, bird feeders hung from carefully trimmed trees, and the sounds of birdsong filled the air, no longer a source of contention, but a source of joy. Even Karen, humbled by her feathered ordeal, began to soften her stance. She even allowed a small patch of wildflowers to grow in her own yard, a tiny symbol of her grudging acceptance of the natural world. The story of Pleasant Acres served as a reminder that order and nature don't have to be enemies, that a little bit of wildness can bring beauty and balance to even the most meticulously planned community. The birds, after all, had brought more than just feathers. They had brought change.